Hey folks, Jordan Chariton with Status Coup. Hope you're having a lovely day. MSNBC and the corporate media are trying to dance on the grave they've been digging for Bernie Sanders. Now, before I get to the recent clip, we have to have a reality check. Elizabeth Warren is moving up in the polls. Many polls that I've looked at have her even at number 2. It's a fact a lot of you don't like, but we have to deal in reality. She is moving up. A large part of why she's moving up, if we want to keep it real, is the Donald Trump-like free media Elizabeth Warren has enjoyed from MSNBC, CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post. She has been showered with very adoring coverage now for months from all of those, and they haven't really laid a glove on her when there are actual critiques and in real reporting that should be done to challenge Warren on some things. You're not seeing that. And I think the adoring coverage of Warren, which, as I've been saying for weeks now, it's not so much about Warren as it is of them to prop up somebody else to try and defeat Bernie Sanders. I think you're starting to see that strategy that the corporate media is using reflected in some of the polls. I don't think it's, time to throw in the towel, to declare Bernie Sanders has lost his mojo or he's not going to become the nominee. I think all of that is premature. Polls, it's 5 months before Iowa, so the polls now do not necessarily reflect what's going to happen on the ground in Iowa. But MSNBC and those other outlets I mentioned are doing their darndest to essentially create a narrative that Bernie is so 2016 and Elizabeth Warren is it. And it's Warren versus Biden, and trying to really get that to sink in to the zeitgeist to essentially demolish Bernie Sanders' campaign. And I don't know any better way of showing you that than playing some of this morning Joe clip from this morning. I've actually been a little under the weather the last few days, so I wasn't even live yesterday. And I was sleeping, and I woke up, I was feeling a little better, and I turned on Morning Joe, Know Your Enemy. That's why I turned it on. Not, physically. We're not, declaring violence or anything. But I watched this clip. I couldn't believe it. Let's watch a little bit of it.
Fox News poll has Joe Biden at 29%, down 2 points since last month. It is Biden's lowest level of support among Democratic primary voters in a Fox News poll since May. Bernie Sanders got an 8-point jump, placing him ahead of Senator Elizabeth Warren at 18%. Warren fell 4 points since August to 16%, putting her in third place. Meanwhile, in 2020 matchups against President Trump, Biden, Sanders, Warren all are ahead.
Well,
Biden has the largest advantage over Trump at 14 points if the election were held today.
Well, that's not even close. That's 14 points. Can we go back to the Democratic poll, though, for a second? Because there's a lot of people shaking their heads. Bernie had the weakest performance I've ever seen him have in debate last week. He was screaming from beginning to end, louder than usual, was hoarse. It was just off. I am not sure where the +8 came from since August. Also, I think everybody else is surprised that Elizabeth Warren, after yet another great debate performance, Willie, would be down 4 points. That is completely different than the poll we showed just a few days ago. And again, polls are just snapshots, but I think most every other poll I've seen has Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden both fighting for the top spot.
Yeah, I think
Biden's lowest.
Oh, most every other poll I've seen, or meaning most every other poll I like the results of. So from the beginning of that clip, you hear the condescension in Mika Brzezinski, or Mika Scarborough, his wife's voice. Bernie Sanders in second place, almost like this is not real. This is a surprise. This is, not correct. Like Bernie Sanders in second place. You could tell they are oozing with condescension against Bernie Sanders, and frankly, it's intentional, folks. It's intentional. Then you have Joe Scarborough saying, "Oh, everybody at the table's head is shaking because we don't know where the 8 points is coming from." Well, maybe you, Joe Scarborough, thought he had a bad debate performance, but everyone else didn't. yes, he did have a hoarse voice, which there's nothing you could do. He's campaigning all around the country. Sometimes you lose your voice. It's unfortunate. I'm sure that there are some days on the campaign trail where he would like to rest his voice, but you got to go campaign. You got to go reach voters. But what's amazing about this clip is this propaganda. He was angry. He was yelling the whole time. He had a terrible performance. I don't know where the 8 points come from. Is that political analysts or just essentially trying to fool your viewers into thinking this is a fake poll? These numbers aren't real. I don't know where Fox News is getting their numbers. And by the way, Fox News, say what you want. I'm not a supporter of Fox News. It's a propaganda mill. Their polls are used and referenced by other news outlets, so it is an accurate poll. So already we are establishing that they do not like the results of this poll. They are trying to diminish the results of this poll. Not only that Bernie Sanders is in second place, but that he's up 8 points since the last Fox News poll, and Warren is down several points, and Biden is down several points. It doesn't fit their narrative. And frankly, I tweeted this morning this clip and said, when is MSNBC just going to register as a super PAC? I mean, this is literally the efforts of a super PAC to twist, to spin, and to basically do PR for your preferred candidates or against the candidate you're trying to knock down. This is all it is. It's not news. You know, we could disagree with certain news outlets if they are being factual. If they still ooze establishment, we could call it out. If they're still doing, not offering context, if not offering the truth, we should call it out. But this is completely blatant. They're just saying, I don't like this poll, so let's dismiss it. It gets worse.
Fighting for the top spot.
Yeah, I think we all shrugged a little bit when we saw that, just because it runs so counter to all the other, not just one poll, but all the other polling, which shows Elizabeth Warren surging up, Joe Biden holding steady, which shows in this poll as well, and also Bernie Sanders coming back down to earth a little bit. So I don't know. We'll see what the next polls look like. But Karine Jean-Pierre is with us. She's a senior advisor at MoveOn.org and an MSNBC contributor. Karine, Joe Biden is down 2 points in that poll, but I think if you looked at it in a vacuum and you're Joe Biden's campaign, despite some shaky debate performances, he's still up by 11 points even in that poll.
That's exactly right. And who knows, that poll could very much be an outlier because, like you all just said, it seemed a bit odd, the result of the top three there, especially after the debate performance that we just saw last week. But I think it is a reminder that we are still a long way away, right? We're a long way away from this election being decided. And it's not about national polls, the primary, right? It's really about these state-by-state primaries. I mean, that's how.
Yeah, this poll, it's odd. It's an odd poll, you know? And honestly, since this national poll doesn't give us the results we want, Bernie in second, Warren in third, we're going to just dismiss national polls. It's really not about national polls. It's about state and state-level polls. I actually agree with that. I don't think the national polls are as important as the state polls, but their narrative completely changes when the national poll is good. So, for example, when NBC, this is MSNBC, so part of the same corrupt family, when NBC just came out with a poll a couple days ago that showed Elizabeth Warren in second, leading Bernie Sanders by 11 points, they were all about that national poll. There was no context. Yeah, well, the national polls don't really mean anything. It's the state-level polls. They also didn't tell their audience that that poll that showed Elizabeth Warren in the lead of Bernie Sanders by 11 points, I believe, only polled 500 people. So, I'm not going to be a polling truther and say let's not trust all the polls, but it's not a big sample size when you're only polling 500 registered Democrats and Elizabeth Warren is in second place, leading Bernie Sanders by 11. I could tell you, and if you want to go, if we can go through that poll just for a little bit, let me zoom in so you could see it. 506 Democratic primary voters, including 278 respondents with a cell phone only, and 11 respondents reached on a cell phone, but who also have a landline. So let's get this straight. 506 Democratic primary voters, 278 with a cell phone. meaning the majority of those they polled had a landline. So, small sample size, 500 Democratic primary voters. The majority had only had landline phones, no cell phones. Would that indicate maybe they oversampled? No offense to my older viewers. Maybe they oversampled older viewers? Small sample size, 500. Oversampling, the majority is landlines. Elizabeth Warren up by 11 points. Again, like I said in the beginning, Elizabeth Warren is surging. We can't deny that. I'm not going to do, fake news here. She is. She is doing well in many of the polls. Many of the polls, she is leading Bernie Sanders. That doesn't mean Bernie Sanders has no shot. That's just the current state of the race. I think Bernie Sanders could do some things to improve on that, which I'll get into in another video. But the point is, they are cherry picking the polls that fit the narrative and the candidate they want and demolish and destroy not only the candidate, but the movement that threatens their business interests. That's all this is. That's why you have Joe Scarborough. Oh, Bernie was angry the whole time. That's why you have other guests on the show saying this is an odd poll. And we don't need to focus on national polls. Let's focus on the state level polls. But that wasn't even the worst of it. If you could stomach any more of this, let's get to the worst part of this.
Speech in New York City back in the summer of 2003, it was massive. And people were declaring Howard the next Democratic nominee because he had, got to translate that into campaign.
Biden is the front runner. We had an Iowa poll yesterday that showed him tied with Elizabeth Warren in the state of Iowa. Let's say, for example, the polls like that show nationally him with a double-digit lead, but she spins it in Iowa and wins there. All of a sudden, it's a totally new race, obviously, because a lot of those voters, perhaps in South Carolina, who say today that they will support Joe Biden, may look at Elizabeth Warren as a more viable candidate, may now see some new weakness in Joe Biden. So we'll look at these polls. We'll obviously follow the race closely as it bumps along the next few months, but the votes come in Iowa in 5 months.
I think the NBC news poll, Mika, showed that only 9% of Democrats feel strongly about the person that they
right.
selected.
No, they're undecided. They still don't know. So that's good news for everybody.
9 out of 10 Democrats still haven't made up their mind, and somebody could still jump into the race. You never know.
Well, that's possible, although I think probably less likely. But to your point about Howard Dean in 2003, I remember in December of 2003, John Kerry calling me from Iowa, where he was literally going door to door to beg me to see if I could find someone to give him another $2,000 to get him through Iowa. And of course, a month later, he ended up doing very well there. So it can change a lot. The other interesting thing to note in the NBC poll was that Elizabeth Warren is the second choice of a very large number of Democrats. If you add her first choice and her second choice together, she actually is in the lead. And so I discount this Fox poll a lot. I think the one the other day from NBC was a lot more interesting.
And when Mike Barnicle was here last.
I just discount this Fox News poll. The NBC poll that had the candidate that a douchey Wall Street banker, Steve Ratner, that the candidate that I prefer. I find that poll more interesting. So I'm going to discount this poll that shows Bernie Sanders up 8 points and shows Bernie Sanders in second. I'm just going to discount this one. And you know what? I find the other one with Warren at number 2 very interesting. Again, they don't tell their audience that their own poll, the NBC poll, only surveyed 500 people. They don't tell the audience that the majority of those polled was landline only. Again, I'm not trying to be a polling truther. I think I take a lot of these polls with a grain of salt, but some of these polls are better than others. I think polls are a snapshot. To me, I think it's way more important the on-the-ground canvassing, because Bernie Sanders' campaign is kind of taking a page out of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's book. AOC targeted a lot of areas where people traditionally do not vote. Bernie Sanders' campaign is doing the same thing, so those people generally will not show up on polls or will not get called by polling companies because they've never voted or they haven't voted in a long time. But what I am saying is this is the kind of propaganda, frankly, that is allowing Elizabeth Warren to rise. I am not saying Elizabeth Warren is not running a good campaign. I think she's full of it on a lot of things. I would like to challenge her on a lot of things, aka go to Status Quo's GoFundMe. We'll put the link in the description. Help us out. Hint, hint. It's my birthday tomorrow, 33. GoFundMe, so we can get back in the field. But the point is, I'm not saying she's not rising, because she is running a good campaign, whether we like it or not. She is, she does have big crowds. Although, frankly, if we look at that whole, she had 20,000 people in Washington Square Park. Not so sure about that. This is from a Huffington Post reporter. New York City parks tell me they permitted Warren's rally for a crowd of 8 to 10,000. They believe the park's capacity is 10,000 and cannot corroborate Warren's 22,000 figure. She said 20,000. A spokesman for the city department, Parks and Recreation, told HuffPost that officials believe the park's capacity is 10,000 and that Warren's event had a permit for 8 to 10,000. The city could not corroborate Warren's crowd estimate. I could tell you, because I covered Bernie's campaign and I was at Washington Square Park when he had 27,000 in the park, and they all said possibly as many as 40,000 surrounding the park, inside the park, outside the park. I was not at Warren's event, so I can't tell you from an observer's view. I was not feeling well Monday night, but from the aerial shots, that did not look to me like 20,000 people knowing the park. Doesn't mean she didn't have a significant crowd. I'm not taking anything away from her. But frankly, campaigns, including Bernie's campaigns, do tend to stretch numbers sometimes. But when the park is saying we only permitted her for 10,000, I find it hard to believe she did have 20,000. But that's a discussion for another day. The point is, a huge part of Elizabeth Warren's rise can be attributed to at this point, millions and millions of free advertisements she has gotten from NBC, MSNBC, and all of the print and digital outlets. It helps when people who might not know of you, or might either be on the Bernie train or on other people's trains, are just being submerged with how great you are and how you have a plan for everything and all this. I think she has a lot of thank yous to give to the corporate media puppet masters.